Hello, everybody, and welcome to another interview by myself, Jamie Theodosi. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, the play-by-play commentator for the UFC, the greatest combat sports commentator of all time, Jon Anik. John, how you doing today, mate?
Appreciate the intro, Jamie. Too kind, brother. I'm doing well. How are you?
All good. Thanks for asking, mate. Thanks for asking. So the first thing I want to talk to you about, John, is obviously it's well documented what goes into a fighter's fight week and the things they have to go through fight week. But what does a typical fight week look like for yourself, in terms of preparation and that sort of thing?
So, my longtime now former broadcast partner, Brian Stan, had this great quote back in the day. And he said of our broadcast, it's an open book test. You might as well show up with some notes. And it sort of dawned on me that I took so many closed book tests in my life that for this particular exercise, Jamie, we can show up with as many notes as we have, right? So I think sometimes I've been a victim of that in my own mind, as far as there's no such thing as over preparation. So you just keep preparing and try to maximize every single hour. But it's pretty daunting. I'm sitting here talking to you on Wednesday, November 1st, and we have a pay-per-view coming up in about 10 days. So this is essentially the jumping off point for the preparation. If I'm not in a back-to-back, if I was calling the fights in Sao Paulo, Brazil this weekend, everything gets condensed and compressed, and I think cram is sort of a negative verb in broadcasting circles, but things do get crammed when you're in a back-to-back. But right now, talking to you, I received my UFC 295 bios from the UFC today. I'll print those out. That's my jumping off point. I'll go through my fighter card library, get all my old cards, make new ones, transfer some old notes. All the while we're voicing things. A lot of the in-arena stuff that you hear is pre-voiced. And it's essentially just a sprint, maximizing every moment and knocking out every particular thing that I have that day, right? Like Thursday, I just try to say, all right, I might have a press conference. I got 15 fighter meetings. Let's just take that day for what it is. Format meeting Friday. I'm emceeing 2 weigh-ins, right? You got the official weigh-in, ceremonial weigh-in. Just kind of take that day for what it is and take it one day at a time. And thankfully, I'm 12 years in and this is the devil that I know. So I have a pretty good handle as to what it's going to take from me physically and mentally. But it's pretty daunting, man, if you take it seriously. And I certainly do.
Course. And I mean, it's very interesting to hear what goes into that sort of preparation. Like I said, fans out there know what goes into a fighter's fight week and that sort of thing, but it's kind of they probably look past how much work goes into preparing for someone like yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for anyone in any walk of life, like I don't profess to be the most ambitious guy in the room necessarily, even if I've realized some success in my career. But sometimes in life, right, whether you're doing homework in middle school, looking for an easy way out, right? I can't imagine if I was 12 or 13 years old doing homework right now and I could just go on Google and say, hey, how do you multiply these fucking fractions? You know what I mean? So I was never somebody that looked for the easy way out per se, but oftentimes I've wondered aloud, is there a way for me to do this broadcast without that Friday in particular being so cumbersome or without the preparation being so cumbersome? And the answer is no. And I'd imagine you'd approach it the same way. 26 to 30 fighters on any given Saturday night. And it doesn't matter to the father of the first prelim fighter of the night what I got coming up later on. I got to do right by his son or daughter, right? And make sure that when I provide the soundtrack for their UFC debut or their professional life, that I know what's going on. And certainly in the COVID-19 climate, when we went to 15 fights regularly, I complained a little bit. And I said to my bosses, something's going to fall through the cracks, man. Like 30 fighters in addition to all the show formatics. And I'll be real with you, I was freaking out as far as the preparation was concerned because it all starts with those athletes and doing right by those athletes. And then it comes to all the show stuff. But, the foremost priority, my man, is to make sure we get everything right, accurate, and try to tell the story and humanize these athletes as best as we possibly can.
Perfectly said. And I kind of want to rewind back to UFC 292 earlier this year, and the UFC's return to Boston. What were your emotions going into that event and being able to call a pay-per-view in your home city?
Gosh, it was unbelievable. And thank you for asking. I used to sit in the nosebleeds as a Boston Celtics season ticket holder. So to be on the floor, calling a live sporting event of any kind was particularly special, even if it wasn't a Boston Celtics game on the famed parquet. But man, there's just nothing quite like that atmosphere. And I think selfishly for a lot of us, at least domestically in the United States, we're so attached to our city as sports fans that when the UFC comes to town, we really want our fans to show well, right? We want them to be loud. We want them to arrive early. We want them not to boo the wrestling and the grappling. And to a woman, to a man on our crew, everybody was raving about the Boston crowd. And so that was particularly special. As Celtics fans, we say it's the jungle, and welcome to the jungle. UFC 292 is special. And, sometimes people wonder aloud why we don't go to big cities more often. We're always in Phoenix and Houston. Why are we not in Chicago or Detroit or Boston more often? Dana obviously has roots in New England. He wanted to bring a big show to Boston. He held out to bring that big show to Boston, and Sean O'Malley and everybody else delivered.
I mean, they delivered exactly like you've just said. And on a similar note, you actually got to work your first event in England in over 10 years this past March at UFC 286. What was it like seeing it firsthand, how much the sport has grown over this side of the pond? Because like I said, your last event that you called in England was 10 years ago. So the growth of the sport in that period of time must have been really kind of eye-opening to see that firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about me, but I have publicly bemoaned the fact that I don't get a chance to call fights in front of some of the best pound for pound crowds in mixed martial arts. So to get to experience that for Leon Edwards' first title defense was particularly special. I could not believe it had been that long, but obviously we have great broadcasters over there that handle a lot of those assignments. But yeah, man, I mean, there's just nothing quite like that atmosphere. I always say, Canadians maybe per capita make the most noise, but I think that speaks to my inexperience calling fights in the UK. There was a time where I was going to Europe fairly regularly, very early on in my tenure with the UFC. And then obviously there have been big gaps, but I think Tommy Aspinall might have something to say as far as how often we get back to the UK for big shows in the not too distant future. So happy when they call my number. And, if I didn't have 3 kids, Jamie, I'd probably be begging my boss to do as many shows over there as possible with respect to my guy, Johnny G. So, but we'll see. Hopefully we get at least one pay-per-view in the UK in 2024. And I think we will.
For sure, yeah. And you've just mentioned it there, obviously having 3 kids and trying to juggle that work life as well as family life. How difficult is it for you to do that on a weekly basis when you are preparing for these big events and putting so much preparation into them? How difficult is it for you to juggle that?
Well, it's hard, and I certainly don't think that I have mastered it or struck any sort of work-life balance. I do my best, but I think sometimes a lot of us who travel for a living and are gone 100 nights a year, when we come back, maybe we try to overcompensate, and sometimes it's hard to just softly let yourself back into the household. And sometimes I've said to my daughters, like, I can't just come home and not parent you, right? Like, because you'll be tuning me out eventually. So sometimes I still got to come home and I still have to actually parent, which I know can be difficult on them. But I try to be as present and do as much as humanly possible. And every soccer practice or game that I can attend, I'm certainly there. We had Halloween last night, which was great. They got a half day today. I mean, how soft are these kids nowadays, right? They get a fucking half day after Halloween. They got to recover from eating all that candy and staying up late. But no, it's good. Some people have suggested to me that maybe it's actually a subconscious, nice balance, right? To be away, to not just sort of be, in the sort of childcare world 24/7, 365, but I miss my kids, man. I was that homesick camper, and leaving doesn't get any easier as I get older. That's for sure.
No, of course not. And I can't imagine how difficult it is to balance that sort of work and family life. It must be very, very tough on you. Let's just talk about some fights then. Let's get onto it. Talk about some fights. I've got your time, and I want to kind of pick your brain. There was a huge fight this past weekend. Obviously, we're in this era of crossover boxing, and obviously Francis Ngannou's performance will have likely knocked some confidence into MMA fighters around the world that they can possibly go and do similar sorts of see similar results themselves. Do you think crossovers will become more regular now that we've seen Francis kind of perform at such a high level?
Well, I just hope, and I know the odds were not in favor of the mixed martial arts fighter in this particular contest. I just hope if there are crossover affairs going forward, that at least we send the right MMA guys in there, right? I mean, let's send Max Holloway in there to try to box up some world champion's face. So I'm very happy for Francis, right? He was so gracious with me. I really cherished all my time with him. I'm so grateful to have the chance to have, provided the soundtrack for some of his signature moments in his UFC career, and just happy for the team to bet on themselves the way they did and to fare so well that you laid the foundation for a rematch, if not immediate at that. So I'm just very happy for Francis. And I have no problem with the crossover type of fights, right? But Jake Paul against Ben Askren was the easiest bet in the history of professional sports, right? And that was a pro boxing bet, right? And Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva and others, I just don't know that it was the right time to be back in the MMA horse. There were a lot of people that doubted Francis Ngannou going in here. I was not necessarily one of them. I wasn't rushing to the window to bet him necessarily, but I wasn't surprised watching that all play out. I think the question really beckons, what type of Tyson Fury do we see in a rematch? And does he, after graciously affording Francis Ngannou this opportunity, afford him the rematch? Because, I'm not so sure. I think he's going to handle some other business first, and maybe he'd be wise to do that and rebuild a little bit before dealing with the Predator again.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see what Francis's next move will be. Does he go for a fight with someone like Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua, or does he go for that rematch after performing so well? It's kind of all up in the air with this whole Fury Usyk fight. But the next thing I kind of want to ask you is, do you think there is anyone in the mixed martial arts world at the moment, specifically in the UFC, that could go over and have that level of success in a boxing debut? Is there anyone out there that you feel could replicate that success?
At heavyweight?
Any weight class, any weight class.
I do think there are other fighters in different weight classes. And obviously, I mentioned Max Holloway. We have some outstanding boxers. I think it's going to be interesting to see Jorge Gamebred Masvidal challenge himself in that setting, albeit when he's a little bit long in the tooth. How would Sergei Pavlovich do in a boxing setting if he devoted himself to that for 24 months, right? The hand speed on him, there's just a lot to like about a lot of these guys. So I don't know that we should be all that surprised. I think we should be encouraged by Francis Ngannou's performance. But when you mentioned Deontay Wilder, it's hard for me to almost focus on anything else thereafter. The dream fight for me with respect to a Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury rematch is definitely Deontay Wilder and Francis Ngannou in a boxing setting. There's nobody really that I want to see Francis compete against in MMA unless you're talking about a UFC crossover. And then I think there are three guys, Jon Jones, Sergei Pavlovich, and Tom Aspinall, that make a ton of sense. But, bro, Deontay Wilder, Francis Ngannou, I think in boxing, right? I think for Francis Ngannou, you have all of this leverage now and all of this momentum. Mixed martial arts is a risky sport against any heavyweight. Not that boxing isn't, but it's a lot more simple a sport. And I think if I'm Francis Ngannou, my next combat sports endeavor is going to be boxing.
For sure, yeah. And you've mentioned three other heavyweights right there. Obviously, we've got UFC 295 coming up next weekend. We've had that news that Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic won't be happening then. And I know you have your reservations on whether that fight will get rebooked. I've heard your thoughts on that Anik and Florian podcast. What were your initial thoughts when Aspinall versus Pavlovich was booked? Because for me, that's as intriguing fight as what Jones versus Stipe is.
Aspinall-Pavlovich is as good a heavyweight fight as can be put together in 2023. You can make an argument, skill for skill and relative to each fighter's respective prime, that those are the two best heavyweights in the world. And I say that with all due respect to Jon Jones, who has fought only once in the last 3.5, 4 years. I felt it grossly ambitious to suggest or think that Jon Jones was going to compete in March at UFC 285 and then turn it around and compete twice in a span of 7 or 8 months. Not to put it past the guy, but he hadn't fought in 3 years, right? To get through 2 training camps and to compete twice in a calendar year, I just think it's asking a lot. So this heavyweight fight between Aspinall and Pavlovich is awesome. Now, you and I, Jamie, are insulated, right? And we are hardcores, we are avid fans, but I do think that the avid part of our fan base is swelling and getting bigger by the day. So even though maybe Jon Jones's exit from this fight card will be reflective in the pay-per-view number, I don't think it's going to affect the live gate. This remains one of the hottest tickets in UFC history. And for guys like you and me to get a fight like Pavlovich and Aspinall and have it come together without any buildup and feeling pretty confident that it'll hold together, I don't have to sell you on. It is a huge, huge heavyweight fight. And even though I think the interim belt should be silver, one of those guys absolutely deserves to be a world champion in 2 weeks, and they will be.
It feels like only in the UFC something like this could happen, where just a week out from the fight, we lose the main event and we end up with this absolute blockbuster fight as a replacement. I mean, it happened last week with 294 as well. The Charles versus Islam matchup fell, and we ended up with an even more intriguing matchup. It feels like only the UFC can pull things like this off. And like you said, I'm massively intrigued, especially being from this side of the pond, to see if Aspinall can capture that interim belt and possibly, very possibly, keep Jones in the game, because it's something that he spoke to us about at UFC London. He wants to excite Jon Jones into sticking around to fight him because it's his dream fight. How likely do you feel that is of a possibility, considering Jones's situation?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think the reason why the UFC is able to spin this thing forward so seamlessly with high level talent is because 90% of the best fighters in the world are under that banner, and they do have protection mechanisms built in. Sergei Pavlovich was the backup here. I think the question beckons, what was Tom Aspinall doing relative to this date in mid-November, knowing that he was on the precipice of changing his life forever, financially and otherwise? Was he training for this date thinking that something might happen? And you got to think he probably was. I hope the Jon Jones fight materializes for Tom Aspinall, but Jon Jones has such a specific legacy to uphold that I just don't know that in terms of risk mitigation, you're going to be fighting Sergei Pavlovich or Tom Aspinall. I think that's why for Jon Jones strategically, not that he's picking his opposition, but Stipe Miocic, having last fought at 38, now being 41 or maybe even 42 when they compete, makes a lot of sense to Jon Jones. He's also the greatest heavyweight of all time. And Tom Aspinall doesn't have that type of legacy. But certainly for guys like you and me, the fight that gets us most excited, I think, in 2024 and beyond is Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall, because even though Tommy's fights have been short, gosh, man, I mean, he just looks the part. And so does Sergei Pavlovich. That's why this fight is just systematically insane. For guys like you and me, like the Super Bowl is November 11th.
Yeah, that's very true. It's these new breed of heavyweights as well. We've got Jolton Almeida fighting this weekend, who falls under that kind of category of a new breed of heavyweight. Sergei Pavlovich, Tom Aspinall, two guys as well that are this new breed of heavyweight. Did you kind of see that coming into fruition when you've got these older guys like Stipe, Jones? Did you think that there would be this kind of new breed coming through, or could you not see that when it was all happening?
So there's always talent that emerges. Sometimes divisionally, you don't know if it's going to be at heavyweight or if it's going to be at bantamweight. Certainly, Jailton Almeida is more of a comp to Khamzat Chimaev in terms of immediate contention. As soon as he started putting people away, it was like, man, oh dear, this guy's going to be a problem in multiple divisions. And quickly, if I could take 20 seconds to acknowledge Curtis Blades, who has 12 UFC wins, more than Sergei Pavlovich and Tom Aspinall combined, I believe, or at least as many, I think. He's headlined 7 times for the UFC, accepted a fight against Aspinall on the road, accepted a fight against Sergei Pavlovich, and accepted a fight against Jailton Almeida. He's 1-1, by the way, in that series, had to pull out of the fight against Jailton Almeida. But Blades has never fought for a belt, and I think he deserves credit for fighting all 3 of those guys, because it is rare, and I didn't see it coming, to have 3 guys who you and I think look the part of potential future world champion to emerge in a division. And not all that long ago, none of them had a number next to their name. So I do think it's unique. But as far as the next superstar or the next big time talent walking through that door, it happens all the time. People worried what we would do post Conor and Ronda, and now we have Sean O'Malley, Israel Adesanya, and everybody else. And, who could have envisioned Alexander Volkanovski? Maybe we thought that he could be a world champion, but could he be a global superstar? I think he's exceeded expectations as far as that is concerned. Leon Edwards, right? So immortalized behind you. So on it goes, man. I'm excited where the heavyweight division is, but I'd be lying if I said I saw that type of talent coming.
Yeah, of course. And obviously we've got a blockbuster main event for that card. It was the co-main event, been bumped up to the main event. We've got the return of Yuri Prohaska taking on Alex Pereira in what is Alex's second fight in the division. earning that title fight in his second fight. How excited are you for the return of Yuri Prohaska and that matchup itself?
Well, if you guys don't take it from me, take it from Jamie. Alex Pineda versus Yuri Prohaska is about as good a fight as we can put together in any division right now. It really is. Mick Maynard was so excited at the possibility of Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prohaska. And this fight is right there stylistically and otherwise. Some might say it actually supersedes it just because Alex Pineda has realized gold in another division. He's realized great success in a kickboxing realm. And I know you heard this on the Anik and Florian podcast this week. Kenny Florian suggested that Francis Ngannou is now a combat sports legend based upon what he did against Tyson Fury, even though he didn't win. Alex Pineda has done some legendary stuff. If he can beat Yuri Prohaska and become a two-division UFC world champion in this amount of time, I don't know what else could be said about his legacy. He'd be a first ballot future UFC Hall of Famer as soon as he retired. So there's a lot in front of Alex Pineda. Excited to see Prohaska back, about as fascinating, intriguing, explosive, enigmatic, watchable a fighter as we have on the roster. So yeah, very excited, man. Like, not because the UFC cuts my check. And I'm a Boston guy. I got no love for New York and Madison Square Garden, but I can't wait to get there.
I mean, perfectly said. Absolutely perfectly said. I don't want to take too much more of your time, John, but if we could we get a few more fun questions in? I've got a little segment that I'd love to do with you, if that's possible.
Of course, brother. What do you got?
Right, so it's a little segment I'll call Split Decisions, and it's just a few kind of quick fire questions. They'll make sense as they go along. So if you're ready, I'll fire them over.
Let's do it.
Right, so the first one is, if you could change or add one rule in MMA, what would it be?
Oh, man. So I know these are supposed to be quick, so I'm not going to
No,
say
not
needs.
quick. It doesn't need to be quick fire. But it's kind of like those sort of questions, if you know what I mean.
I mean, I want to say knees to the head of a grounded opponent, but I've spent too much time fighting for how superficially violent MMA is. So I will say just get rid of the 12-6 elbows. You can elbow anybody from every different direction because I just think there's a gray area there. And a lot of fighters waste a lot of time. And my man Johnny Bones shouldn't have to deal with that red stripe on his Wikipedia page. So I'll say clean that up a little bit as far as the elbows are concerned.
Yeah, that's the most popular answer I've received from fighters. The 12-6 elbow, the elbow, they want that rule gone. It's just it's you can cause as much damage from any other elbow as you can with that sort of angle.
Yeah.
So it's one of those ones. If you could only eat one more meal for the rest of your life, but it gave the perfect nutrients, what would you eat?
I know peanut butter and jelly is very nutrient dense, but I would probably go with like Chinese food, some sort of sesame chicken and a bowl of white rice or something.
Oh, that sounds perfect. The third one is, so I've got to change this one around a little bit for you because normally I'd ask a fighter if they were in a gym setting and they were given the aux cord or the Bluetooth, what's one song they would play. But what I'm going to ask you, John, is if you could only listen to one genre of music for the rest of your life, what genre would you pick?
So it would have to be reggae because I got to chill the
Oh,
fuck out. I mean, I certainly have listened to more hip hop than reggae in my lifetime. Big 1990s rap guy. But no, if it was one, it would have to be like reggae or spa music so I can chill the fuck out.
yeah, I mean, that's perfect. I like that answer. What was your first job?
So I waited tables at Pizzeria Uno. I picked golf balls on a driving range. I spent a lot of time working with autistic children, ages 2 through 18. But I think the first job I ever had was slinging plates at Pizzeria Uno. And anyone who has ever waited tables or bartenders, but anyone who has ever served or bussed tables, you have my utmost respect because I did it forever, and I'll never forget throwing my apron into a dumpster after my final shift.
Wow, I bet that's somewhere now in Boston, just in a dumpster. Yeah,
Exactly.
a bit of history that is.
That's right.
So if you could make the perfect fighter using fighters from past and present, who would you use for attributes of striking, grappling, heart, and IQ?
Striking, grappling, hard, and IQ. As you're talking, all I'm thinking is Merab Dvalishvili for cardio. All right, so IQ, we will go Alexander Volkanovski. Striking, we will go Anderson Silva. Grappling, we will go Khabib Nurmagomedov. And heart, I mean, I could go with hundreds of fighters here. I will go with Matt the Immortal Brown.
I mean, that is the perfect fighter right there. I'd love to see that fighter somehow made and fighting in the UFC.
I want to see Matt Brown against Jake Paul. I know that's probably not the right guy to send in there, right? It actually probably is more in line. I say Matt Brown, specified rule set with elbows against Jake Paul. But again, a lot of people say to me, dude, like, you're going to complain, as you did earlier with Jamie, about sending these 40-year-olds in there against Jake Paul. And here I am making the case for another one. So,
but we know that Matt would put on a good show, though.
God, he'd do something, man. He'd do something.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true. If you could travel to any place in the world right now, where would you travel to?
Probably Switzerland. It looks like a movie set. It looks fake, but yeah, Greece, Italy, Switzerland are three countries I have not been to that I'd like to get to at some point in time.
Yeah, I mean, Greece is beautiful. I'm from those parts. I'm from Cyprus, so if you could ever get to visit Cyprus, then check out the beaches there. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
If you could go for a drink with anyone in the world right now, who would you pick, dead or alive?
Bill Belichick, the longtime head coach of the New England Patriots, and just have a lot of respect for what he's done and his ability to get 45 men to just go through a brick wall for him, age 22 to 42, for 20 years. I really respect his love of football and everything he's done to bring joy to me and my family.
I mean, I won't talk to you too much about the Patriots this year, John, because I know that it's a bit of a rough year for yourselves, isn't it?
No doubt about it. I mean, I did get to shake Tom Brady's hand at a UFC live event and thank him for all the joy he's brought my family. So I would have to answer Belichick. But yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to watch everybody celebrate the demise of the New England Patriots. And even my daughter's living down here in South Florida, surrounded by Miami Dolphins fans. They've solicited advice from me, like, Daddy, what do I say? The Patriots are trash and the Dolphins are. And so I just say, honey, just hold up 6 fingers. And they say, well, what does that mean? I say, well, Patriots have 6 world championships. And she says, how many did the Dolphins have? And I say, I think 1, maybe. I really don't know, but certainly not 2 and certainly not 6. So,
yeah. I mean, that's a very good argument, to be fair. People forget the history, don't they? It's one of those ones. And before I let you go, John, if I could, I'd just like to ask you about UFC 300 we've got coming up at the first quarter of next year. How different of an event do you think that could end up looking like compared to the usual pay-per-views that we get?
I'm excited. I didn't get the chance to call UFC 200. I covered UFC 100 for ESPN way back in the day, and then I covered UFC 200 as well. But excited to actually work the live event. God willing, health willing. I hope they color the octagon. Last time they did a shade of gold, and my boss Greg Borsari didn't love the exact shade, so hopefully they get the shade right. But I do think it's pretty powerful to paint the canvas gold. But yeah, I think you're probably going to get 3 world title fights, which is easier said than done. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the Tom Aspinall Sergei Pavlovich winner in defense of some kind, either promoted or in defense actually of an interim title on that very fight card. So it's going to be big. It's going to be all hands on deck. And can't wait to be a part of it.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, John. I know I've taken up a bit more of your time than we planned for, so I'll let you go. Hopefully you get the home studio sorted. Because if you don't know anyone out there that's watching, obviously check out the Anik Florian podcast. Johnny is getting his home studio built, which will, I'm guessing, look absolutely fantastic. So yeah, hopefully you get that sorted soon.
Well, thank you, buddy. Hopefully today's the day, and it's a pleasure to chop it up with you, and hopefully we'll chat again down the line.
Definitely. Thank you very much for your time, mate.
Thank you, brother. Have a good day.